information about this. I went to a presentation by the developer yesterday, and Eduard was there too. You were there too. And my feeling was that there were a lot of unanswered questions, and it was mostly about traffic and about parking. And the project is not just this tower, it's 7 towers in a very reduced space. So we need more answers, I believe, before this is approved. The word should get to the commissioners before they approve this, that they are creating not such a small town, because they are anticipating 13,000 residents in those 7 towers, plus more than 1 million visitors a year just for the Innovation Tower. So the traffic problems are going to be huge. Of course, they ask for a study on traffic, but they want to approve this before the study of traffic is ready. So there are too many unanswered questions. Now, I want to introduce the next segment, which is Watson Island. Is that making traffic worse on the MacArthur Causeway? And we have Fernando Diaz. He's going to be the first speaker for a minute, and then 1 minute to the developer.
Thank you, Andres. Thank you, Sandy, for giving us the opportunity to be here this evening. Like he said, I'm Fernando Diaz, and I represent a coalition of concerned citizens and stakeholders who are very concerned about what's going to happen on Watson Island and how that project will increase traffic and decrease their quality of life. But I didn't want you to hear from me. I actually brought one of the stakeholders who's extremely concerned with the impact of this project, and this is Robert Goodman, and he represents Art Basel Miami Beach. And he'll talk on behalf of Art Basel and their concerns with the mega project development of Watson Island.
Thank you, Andres. About 15 years ago, I became the Florida representative for Art Basel Miami Beach. I don't have to tell all of you what it's meant to our community of South Florida, and not only the cultural community, but all of us. It's changed the perception and our reputation of how we live, and it's burgeoning cultural mecca with the museums and other wonderful activities. I don't know if any of you were old enough to remember a movie called Network, where the star stuck his head out the window and said, "I can't take it anymore." Remember, he screamed.
Man, just tell him I can't take it anymore.
That's not how I feel. How much more development? How many more projects? How many more commissioners are going to nod their heads and blindly give continual permits to projects that reduce our quality of life? I just heard former Commissioner Gongor speak about this unbelievable. I don't know who would wake up one day and say, why don't we put up a 600-foot tower of lights in Miami? And I also scratch my head when no more than 2 miles from where all you live in this wonderful neighborhood, and I live here my whole life, somebody would want to build a retail 4 times the size of a Walmart and an almost 700-room hotel and marina, and not care about how it's going to clog up the causeways and bring more and more to this area. It's wrong. You should tell your commissioner, whoever represents you, I believe it's Sara, it's wrong, and you should stand up for what's right and what's better for our community, for all of us and the future and our kids. Thank you.
The bodyguard comes with it.
All right. We have Brian May. He's the spokesperson for Blackstone, which is the developer of the Watson Island project.
Thank you, Andreas, and thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. My name is Brian May, and I represent Flagstone Development Group, who is the developer of Island Gardens at Watson Island. I appreciate the concerns I think that you just heard. While they're rather gentle and not very specific, there's one sort of small distinction between, say, the Innovation Tower that you were just spoken about and Flagstone and Island Gardens. And that is that there's no moral approvals to be had for Island Gardens at Watson Island. Those approvals are done. The project is approved. Just to give you a brief history, in 2001, the project was put out as an RFP, a competitive process that three developers came in and bid on. One of them, my client, actually happened to win the bid. Later on in 2001, the project was approved by the voters of Miami by 68%. Since then, in 2005, we secured all the marina approvals, all the upland approvals, went through dozens of public hearings. We had a fallout, as we all know, called the Great Recession in 2008, and the project stalled and stopped. In 2010, we were required to go to the city and renegotiate our agreement with them, and we did that. And as a result of that agreement, since 2010, we paid the city over $3.5 million in rent. So while I understand the concerns about traffic and whatnot, and I understand the concern about Watson Island, I think we should ask ourselves a much bigger question, which is not what are we doing to stop development, but what are we doing to address transportation needs? So I would say to you, while people may ask you to rise up and stop this development, I would tell you that that ship has set sail a long time ago. And the folks here in the coalition are behind a lawsuit. They sued in 2005. It was settled and dismissed. In 2014, they sued again. They tried 3 different complaints. It's been thrown out of court, and it's on appeal. So I would tell you, if you want to contribute, go ahead. I will tell you it's probably a waste of your money and a waste of your time. Thank you.
We have 5 minutes now with Sam Duggan, the attorney for the coalition.
Good evening, I'm Sam Dobbins. I am the attorney for the Coalition Against Causeway Chaos. I'm also the attorney representing several City of Miami and Miami Beach residents who have indeed filed a lawsuit against the City of Miami over the illegality of the Flagstone project. Now, I have 7 minutes to speak, and then Brian gets to come back. So I would like to, Brian talked about the lack of specifics, so let's talk about some specifics of this project. What was approved in 2001 in an election would have a mega yacht marina, 2 hotels, 53 and 37 stories high, and 225,000 square feet of retail and commercial space, along with a 10-story parking garage. Now that's the equivalent of about over 2.5 Walmarts on Watson Island with 1 road in and 1 road out. It was approved in 2001 by the electorate, and it was based upon a traffic study that was done in 2004. And it was based upon appraisals that were done in 2002. Now, the 10 years that elapsed without the developer raising the money for that project, there was a recession in that time period, but there were several years when there was no recession, no economic impediment, and the developer could not raise the money to do that project. And the reason is because it's a terrible project. It's the market, the private markets did not buy into it. So when Brian says that that the client was required to go back to the City Commission in 2010, the reason it was required to do that was the developer was in default. It had not met its construction deadlines, and it had not paid the money that it was obligated to pay the city. And in order to get around those defaults, they went back to the commission. So when the developer says that the project was approved, it was renegotiated in 2010 in ways that deviated from that big referendum that they're throwing out at you as being their basis for approval. instead of having to build that project at once and start producing the massive amounts of taxes and revenues that the developer promised at the time, the city allowed the developer to build in phases. That means that at the option of the developer, they could build the marina, then the parking, and then the retail. So when the referendum said that the city would get a minimum of $2 million a year, that promise was wiped out in 2010 when the city renegotiated that. So they deviated from the referendum. That's a violation of the city charter. The charter requires when that public land is leased for private use that it has to be approved by a referendum. But when the city deviated from what was approved by the voters, that negated the legality of the new agreement that was reached in 2010, 2011, and 2012. Now, we all know that things have changed around here and on Miami Beach between 2001 and 2014. The residential population has more than doubled, and so has the commercial activity, the business activity in downtown Miami and on Miami Beach. So the 2004 traffic study has no validity whatsoever in 2014, and yet that's what the city has been relying on, and the developer has been relying on over and over and over again. Now, do you believe that a traffic study in 2004 would meet the requirements for your quality of life in 2014? Does anyone here think a 2004 study would be valid in that respect? No. Back to the project then on this area, and the new 2013 traffic study, which the city never produced until there was a lawsuit, did not measure the impact of that project here on Biscayne Boulevard, or on Alton Road, or 5th Street, or any of the other, or West Avenue. So none of those impacts have been calculated, and we have professional studies here that show that the 2013 traffic study does not meet professional standards. So what the city of Miami did, without taking into consideration the impact of this project on your quality of life, is just give the developer more time, more flexibility, and allow them to deviate from what the people approved in 2001. Now, the other major consideration that you need to take into account here is that that $2 million so-called minimum rent that was approved based upon a 2002 appraisal, the city was required to conduct new appraisals by the state of Florida, which they did in 2014. The appraisers told the city that the fair market rent for this project is no longer $2 million, it's $7.2 million. And yet, that information was either given to the commissioners who refused to admit it during the commission meeting where that was approved, or it was withheld from the commissioners. We don't know that yet. There is a lawsuit over that where those facts are going to come out. But it violates the charter of the city of Miami for the city commission to approve a lease of public land for less than fair market value. And they had information in their hands, and I can give you the memo here to anyone who wants it, which they withheld until my client sued the city for the public records. They had information in their hands that said the value, fair market rent has gone from $2 million to $7.2 million. So the city patently violated its charter when it reapproved that project in 2013 and 2014. So you, the citizens, are going to be subsidizing the Flagstone project to the tune of a minimum of $5 million a year at the start once that gets started. And that's going to escalate over time. So if you think that it's in the public interest, in your interest, to have to you personally subsidize a private developer to utilize the most valuable public green space on the waterfront in the city of Miami for the same kind of private development that private developers have been doing on both sides of the bay with their own money, that you should be subsidizing that. That's what you need to think about next time you go to a public forum where there's a city commissioner from the city of Miami. One more point that Mr. May did not address, which is that it isn't all approved. The developer has pending before the city right now an application to increase the commercial and retail space by 140,000 square feet, from 225,000 already to 390,000 square feet of retail and commercial space. That has not been approved. And the records we were able to get in the lawsuit show that the city staff was prepared to let that increase go through without public hearings, without a new traffic study, all in violation of the city code. Now, when it became obvious that there was scrutiny on that, so far they've walked back from that. But all eyes are on what the city staff is going to do with that 140,000 square feet, because if they do what they're supposed to do and have a new traffic study and have public hearings, that should come back before the city commission. So you need to contact your commissioners, and you need to attend every city commission campaign event and ask the candidates, where do you stand on the Watson Island project, both as it stands now, which is in legal trouble, or if it comes back to the commission, would you vote to reapprove it or to approve the additional 140,000 square feet? On the legal issues, let me be clear. The courts have said that the citizens do not have legal standing to make these charter violations, to raise these charter violations in court. That is a departure from 70 years of precedent in the Florida Supreme Court and the 3rd District Court of Appeal. And yes, it's on appeal, and there are other very prominent citizens in addition to my clients who have been aggrieved by the fact that the courts are somehow restricting your access to go to the court to tell the city that they have to follow their own charter. That's your charter. You voted that charter in, and that charter says you can't lease public land for less than fair market value. So you don't have the ability right now to go to court. Hopefully we'll get that in the appeal, but you do have the ability to get active politically to make sure that those people who have your interest at heart follow the charter.
I'll try to be a little briefer. Do I have 7 minutes or 15 minutes?
20 minutes.
Let me just answer a couple of things that Mr. Dubin put out there. The first of which is, if much of what he had to say here was a real basis for a lawsuit against the project, then his lawsuits wouldn't be getting thrown out of court. That's number one. Number two, when he says to you that the city is not charging fair market value, and in 2014 they failed to push fair market value on the developer, he fails to tell you a couple things. The $2 million he mentions to you is minimum annual guaranteed rent. In addition to that, Flagstone has to pay to the city percentage rent. Of every dollar that flows through the project, the city gets a percentage off of the top. So in addition to the $2 million, when you add up the percentage rent between the hotels, retail, and the first ever mega yacht facility in North America, it easily gets to $7 million. The city understands that, the city commission understands that, my client understands that, and frankly, I think Mr. Dubin understands that as well. He just fails to leave certain things out of his argument. The second thing I would tell you is that we could talk about the traffic studies all day long. There was a traffic study, yes, that was done in 2004. We updated our traffic studies in 2010. We also updated our traffic studies in 2014. Mr. Dubin has gotten the city of Miami Beach to go and order a traffic study of how it would impact the city of Miami Beach. We welcome all of that. I can tell you every traffic study that we've conducted, every traffic study that the city has seen, clearly states that the level of service on Biscayne Boulevard, on 395, on Alton Road, on 5th Street, all of it is no worse than it is today by virtue of our project. By virtue of our project. Now, if people want to do something to cure the issues of transportation, then focus on transportation and transportation improvements. If the city of Miami Beach is worried about getting on and off of Miami Beach, then maybe they should look at the connection between 395 and Miami Beach, and they ought to redo it. Maybe they ought to not have a traffic light sitting there at the end of a major thoroughfare before you get onto Miami Beach. But don't blame that on boogeyman politics on one project on Watson Island, because that's not fair, and frankly, it's not right. There's plenty of public input. One closing comment that I would tell you. When Mr. Dubin speaks about fair market value, in 2010, we were in the throes of the Great Recession. And at that time, no one from the city wanted to talk about fair market value of the property. No one from the public wanted to talk about fair market value of the property. No one wanted an appraisal on the property. We would have loved an appraisal on the property in 2010 because our minimum annual guaranteed rent would have gone down because the value of the property would have never panned out to what it was in 2014. So I will say to you, again, this project should not be treated as if it hasn't been approved. It has been approved. Any modification to the plans will not be anything significant that would draw any kind of need for public hearings, for going through a whole new zoning and planning process. My client would never want to do that. And I will leave you with this. My client is about to go on the hook for upwards of $700 million in an investment on Watson Island. Do you think in your right mind that he would want to have poor traffic conditions, not proper ingress and egress onto Watson Island? Do you think that he would want to constrict his own project that is investing all of his own money and going on the line to pay off debt over a very long period of time? The answer is he'd be foolish to do that. If we did traffic studies and they came back and said, look, you have to rebuild something on 395, he'd have to take that into consideration in his right mind. The reason he doesn't is because none of the traffic studies that have been conducted say that. And I don't think they will. So with that, I wish you all a very good night. If anybody has any questions, I'm here personally. I'll be happy to answer any questions personally or otherwise. Thank you.
You know what's amazing?
Yes, we're going to take a few minutes for questions. So if anyone has any questions about to either side, now is the time.
I have a question. So Brian, you said that taking the $2 million, that with the percentage payments that your client's going to make, that would raise it to $7 million, thereby meeting the obligations that Sam has raised about the additional money that the property has increased in value.
Correct.
But you're still short $5 million.
Actually, you're not, Al. And if you look at historically at any leases that are with the city on any kind of public land, the minimum annual guaranteed rent is the minimum annual guaranteed rent. So as any project that's built, especially of size or significance, doesn't immediately stabilize. It takes 4, 5, 6 years for a project to fill up its leasing, for the hotels to get out there in the marketplace and be mature, for the retail mature, for the mega yacht facility to mature. But you start somewhere.
Right.
So each lease has a minimum annual guaranteed portion. And on top of that, you've got to pay, I believe ours is 2%, 2 to 3% of every dollar that flows through that project goes to the city.
But
There's nothing wrong with that. That gives the developer time to stabilize his project. But as the project grows, 10 years from now, this project's making $10 million a year, $11 million a year, much more than $7 million a year. So it works both ways. Before the project gets stabilized, it's got to have time to get stabilized. And after it gets stabilized and matures, it throws off really significant dollars to the city.
But doesn't it start with the $2 million? They get $2 million regardless, right?
Yeah, no matter what.
So if this had been rearranged, they would have got $5 or $7 million regardless.
They had no right in 2014 to renegotiate the lease payments with us. All that the city approved in 2014 was a waiver of deed restriction that was passed by the Florida Cabinet to allow us to use the property. That is a fact. No one went back and discussed or renegotiated any terms because none of them were on the table. That was done in 2010. And as I explained, no one from the city wanted to renegotiate terms in 2010 because they all knew that the value of the property was in the dirt. Their comps were terrible. People were fire selling properties downtown, on the beach, everywhere. The economy was in a recession. That would have inured to our benefit. We would have paid less minimum rent had they gone out and done that.
But you're talking about public property, and the benefit's supposed to go to the public, to the taxpayers. So you're right. In 2010, it would have benefited to you. But in 2014, it would have benefited to the taxpayers. And since it's the taxpayers that own the property, not your clients, the taxpayers own that property. That's public land.
Of course.
So they're supposed to be the primary beneficiary of public land. not your clients. So if you had paid the $7 million, if you were required to pay the $7 million, all that additional profit that you talk about in payments and whatever would have still increased the amount of money that all of these people would have seen a benefit from. So because that's what's really at stake here, is the benefit to all of these people.
Listen, this project will be one of the greatest projects in terms of benefits to the city that the city's ever seen.
What's the tax?
It's the first, in the first 5 years alone, we pay over $98 million in sales tax to the state. Some of that comes back to the city.
Real estate tax.
Real estate taxes we pay as well. I mean, this is not like we're not paying our fair share.
No,
That's
not
just
arguing
absurd.
that. Not arguing that.
Sure.
What do you think is a better deal for the developer? If the minimum rent was $7 million for perpetuity, or if it's the $2 million base plus the percentage over?
We would take $7 million in perpetuity. If we had to do that, we would take $7 million. Because in year 15, we'll be paying $15 million, $16 million. It just keeps ticking up. And it has an escalator on the base. The minimum rent goes from 2 to plus 3%, plus 3%. It just comes pounding over time. Yes, ma'am?
I have a question for Mr. Devins.
Sure.
Yes, can you explain the size that was approved and then voted by the city? I don't really understand that, and then what we're showing now. It seems to be a little bit larger and bigger, and I really didn't quite understand how all that came to be.
The 2004, the city approved what they call a major use special permit for 2 hotels, 535 and 375 feet, with 605 rooms.
Can you use the microphone?
In 2004, after the referendum, the formal approval gave approval for 2 seconds. The $2 million, you can ask Mr. May when the last time the developer paid the city the $2 million minimum annual guaranteed rent.
When?
Never. Never. Because that rent doesn't apply until they finish the project. And when they got the right to develop in phases, that means that the ability to complete the project is completely in the hands of the developer. So the $2 million could well never happen, and that's in the developer's hands. And the question you raised is not either or. The 1% travels with the $7.2 million as well. So it's a complete falsity to say that the 7.2 million is apples to apples. It's 2 million plus the 1%, or 7.2 million plus the 1%. So that money is coming out of your pockets, the subsidy to the developer, that the city did not force them to pay when it allowed this project in 2014 to go forward for less than fair market rent.
Let me just clarify that for everybody. When we renegotiated the agreement to enter into the ground lease with the city in 2010, the city, for the first time, required us to pay rent before we started construction. So before we could put one shovel in the ground, before we could go to the state and get a deed waiver, before we could do any of that, okay, and your commissioner's here, and frankly, he's the one who drove that deal and made the developer do that. Before we could do any of that, we had to start by paying the city on an annual basis $540,000 for the first year, $750,000, I believe, in the second year, and close to $1 million in the third year. Before we put a shovel in the ground, at the end of the third year, we began paying the city $1 million a year in construction rent. During construction, we are required to pay the city $1 million. That has been a part of the lease and the agreement to enter since 2001. The notion that we have changed that, the notion that we haven't complied with the referendum in that regard, is simply not true. And when we finish, I believe, the first 2 components, we pay the city $2 million. If we do not build the hotels, we pay the city a minimum rent of $2 million a year. That's fact.
Your question is to...
I've been skeptical between the relationship between developers and the commissioners. The history of Miami is replete with things that were promised and the delivery failed. From the arena to very recent projects. The Marlin Stadium is the mecca of miscalculation and double talk. You have been talking about a study that was done in 2001. I think it is relevant to revisit that. Things have changed a lot. I came to Miami 16 years ago. Going to Miami Beach was a breeze. Now it's chaos. I go to Watson Island on my bicycle, it's a mess. From jungle, parrot jungle, whatever it is, to the museum and that awful neon thing that it's an eyesore to everyone. To now they have built a floating beach with inflatable things. You have been talking about dollars, and $2 million today is probably equal to 500,000 years ago. What is your position on this environment? I have seen in the last 15 years, Biscayne Bay deteriorate, becoming as stale as Aventura. The beauty that we had is vanishing because of buildings and people like you.
1 minute.
Yeah, listen, I mean, if you have those concerns, then you should talk to regulatory agencies. But I will tell you that this project, I can't speak for others, it took us 2.5 years to get a marina permit for this project. We went through every conceivable local, state, and federal environmental agency, and it was not an easy process. And we have performed everything that has been required to touch the bay. And, to dredge the bay is a major undertaking. And I think you know that because you live close and you see it every day. Yes, it's a concern, but don't blame the developer. The developer is only following the rules that are set out for him. If he follows those rules, you can't blame him. If you want to blame the agencies or you want to blame environmental regulation, I'm with you. But that's not his fault. He's following the rules and jumping through the hoops. And then everybody's saying he did something wrong. This guy's done everything that he's been asked to do. Everything.
Sam is going to answer that?
Mr. May said that the $1 million construction rent requirement has been there since 2001. I have the official ledger here that we had to sue the city to get. Between February 2001 and September 30th, 2010, Flagstone paid the city of Miami a total of $200,000. The $1 million came in 2010, not because the city was kicking ass and taking names. The developer was in default and the city was ready to throw them off the property. They occupied that beautiful potential public land rent-free for 10 years.
All I'm saying to you folks about the rent, and enough about the dollars and cents, is that the agreement since 2001 was that the developer did not have to pay the city rent until they started construction. In 2010, the city said to us very clearly, you want to continue forward, you have to start paying rent. Whether you start construction in the recession or you don't, you must pay rent. We started paying rent. But in 2001 to 2010, the reason we didn't pay $1 million or any dollars to the city during that time is because we weren't required to, which gets back to my main point. Everything the developer has been required to do, he has done.
Yeah, but you just said you did it, you didn't know what you did.
I'm sorry?
Change your story.
No, I'm not changing the story.
I'd like to ask you,
All right, there's going to be one more question only, and 1 minute from each
Can I ask a question, everybody here? For the last 10 years, if the economy has not gone to as well as we would all like, raise the hand of anybody here that stopped paying their mortgage payment, their rent, their car payments. But in the city of Miami, here's your land for 10 years. You signed to pay us $2 million a year, but you don't have to because things didn't go well. This is a bad project, and we should fight against it with our very last breath. This is bad for Miami.
All right, we have 2 more questions. Very, very brief.
My concern is, again, we're talking a lot about the tax income that's going to be coming in, but I want to go back to the quality of life. I'm a Miamian for the last 40 years. The original contract, you said, was done many years ago and that there's not that much of a difference, but it sounds to me that the upcoming meeting is about making twice the amount of commercial. And then nobody's talked about the Port of Miami and the mega ships that are going to be bringing in these it spreads out of all the containers that can be put across from here to Boca or something crazy like that. So already I feel when I'm coming through the trucks from the new port or from the new tunnel, and we still haven't even seen the mega ships that are coming next year. So that's something that also it's the quality of life. Everyone's talking about money, money, money. Quality of life also counts here.
Can you include your question in that, or is it totally different? Because we have only 1 more minute for each one to answer.
I'm just curious about the type of retail, because I already feel that Miami has so much retail and so much retail is coming online between World Center and Brickell City Center. And so how will your retail stand out against all the other projects that are coming online and leases? Billionaire retail.
All right. You want to answer those questions?
I'm not really authorized to give any details on that. All I can tell you is that anchor tenants are being negotiated as we speak. I think that you will find that the retail there is going to be much different than what you have here today. Whether it's Brickell City Center or whether it's Miami World Center, it's going to be more worldly. I guess that's the right word. And there should be some announcements on that coming in the fall. So.
Just to go back to one point that was previously made, Mr. May said that if the legal arguments that my clients had merit, they wouldn't have been dismissed. The cases were dismissed for lack of standing. That means that the court said that you as a citizen don't have the right to come in here and say that the city violated the charter. But no court has said that it was proper for the city in 2010 to lease that land to Flagstone for less than fair market rent, or 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014. No court has said it was okay to deviate from the referendum by which it was originally approved. No court has said it was proper for Flagstone to switch what it promised it would do in 2001 to what the city then let it do in 2010. No court has said that it was okay for the city to require Flagstone to commence construction by June 2nd, 2014, and they didn't turn a spade. They didn't have a marina permit prior to June 2nd, 2014. They failed to meet that deadline. No court has said any of those things are okay. The merits remain to be contested, and the standing issue will be addressed in the courts.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to belabor all the points which we've talked about ad infinitum. But let me just say this. Mr. Dubin is here with the coalition because they want to get you people excited about this, and they want you to help pay for their lawsuit. And their lawsuit, I'm going to remind you, going back to 2004, 2005, was nothing about the illegalities of the project. This lawsuit is about one thing. The main plaintiff, Mr. Stephen Herberts, lives at 1000 Venetian, and when those towers go up, they're going to block his view of downtown Miami. That's what this is really all about, and that's all I have to say.
That's a good enough reason right there. That's a good reason to sue. If I live in the top, that's good too.
He can answer that too. I live in Coral Gables.
You should all, I invite you to go to the website of the Coalition Against Causeway Chaos. It's very thorough, it's very comprehensive. The data that I've discussed here, it's all there. You'll find it very thorough and very informative. And believe me, to take on the city requires a lot of resources for a lot of things, including information resources like the website, experts. Believe me, this is a very expensive undertaking. The city has spent, I've seen the public records, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars they've earmarked for fighting you, the citizen, from holding the city accountable to follow its own charter. So you decide which side you're on.
Citizens United is